Hey, welcome. This is yet another cold open of the Agile Uprising podcast. We've got Chris, Ken, and Jason. I'm Andy Cleff, one of your co-hosts today, and we're talking about 6 big ideas of adaptive organizations. And hopefully we'll stay on task.
No, we won't.
No, definitely not.
We absolutely will not.
Not a prayer.
Ryan Locker's not here, so we will not be talking hockey. But that's his.
It's already come in.
Oh, come on. We're in for a Florida Oilers final if the conference finals go well. So Ken's in Florida and I'm an Oiler fan, so we might have to do a jersey swap or something.
Well, and Jason, I don't know if you remember, but I live in Dallas, so my team's playing the Oilers and has a pretty decent team. So last night was kind of an odd ending, but I mean anything can happen in 2 overtimes.
I am Philadelphia adjacent. Sympathy cards welcome. Anyway, how do you want to start, Chris? We've got a wonderful book that's been pushed out, The Graham Poobah of Lean Change, and Ken Rickard, A Force for Good in This World.
Oh, I don't know that. It seems like Ken is a force for good, but he's got the empire behind him, so I don't know.
Yeah.
That's let's start with where did conversations go between you two that ended with, hey, we should write something together? Because I know a lot of people. Andy Cleff was one of my best friends. I have never said, Andy, let's write something together. If we did, it was like maybe 20 words.
But it would be the end of the friendship.
That's right. That's right.
So what motivated you? How'd you get started? Why did you do this?
Yeah.
I think everybody kept bugging Ken, like, where can I get these? I've seen you talk at meetups about these things, and where can I get one? And is there a book? And for the love of God, just write a book about this already. And then I think that's the origin story.
Yeah, I'd say so. I was traveling around the country talking at conferences and meetups, and a lot of these ideas just came up kind of organically over time. I hate to admit this, but I spend a lot of weekends in the mornings before my wife gets up, and I just think about complex stuff and do a lot of writing of things down on sticky notes and just ideas and sketch things. And a lot of these things were kind of built out of that. And I was taking those things to conferences and talking about them, and people just kept asking, like we would take a break in a workshop at a conference, or we would get to the end of the session, and it never failed that there was always at least one person that said, hey, where can I get more information on these things? Or have you written a book about this? And I said, well, that's a good idea. So I kind of went to Jason, I think it was last summer, and was like, hey, people are asking about a book. I've never written a book before. You've written a couple. Do you mind helping me out with this? And so that's where it started.
Wow. Do you remember, Ken, what was you said what it sounded like you said is these are individual ideas that kind of sort of ended up glomming together and forming a weird, blended family sort of a thing. Is there one specifically that kind of was the germ of all of this?
Well, of course, some of them started from Jason's, stuff that he's created in the material from Lean Change over the past decade plus. Modified some of those to a certain extent, and then some of them are brand new. I'd say probably the one that has stuck the most, Jason, what do you feel like? Is it probably the 5 levers? I feel like that started to become the core, or the 2 change strategies, one or the other.
Yeah, I think it depends on audience. I guess what I would call the traditional change folks, like who are not coming from Agile, go mental over the 5 universals.
Yeah.
In a good way.
Yeah, completely. They're just like, this makes so much sense to not follow, but these things on the left being more important than the things on the right, because it's almost manifesto-like. And I think Agile people, the vortex.
Oh, we didn't talk about the vortex yet.
The vortex of behavior. There's a little, like a teeny little bit in the book about that, but it's because I think, I don't know, I've been in both communities for so long that the change folks tend to see things differently than Agile folks do. Like Agile folks tend to look at models that are intentionally incomplete or help them think, and they go, I could let me think about how I could use that here. And the change people tend to want more, what are the steps I need to follow? And that, obviously that's not a universal thing, but I think just the perspective from each side are coming at it from different ways. You know, change people, they know about OCM, they know about change, and Agile folks know about all modern practices and stuff like that. And I think when the two of them come together and they see all these ideas together, they start to see that it's less about the steps and the frameworks and more about the helping people make sense of their context.
So for those playing the home game, you know, Jason's Lean Change book has been instrumental in both communities. But for those that haven't heard our previous conversations before, Jason, because we always are getting new audience, would you say that that is the main difference between the communities as far as from your perspective when you speak to them, or or is there further differentiation from like the OCM traditional change community versus traditional Agile folks?
I've learned that the intention is basically the same. The way they express themselves are different.
Okay.
So I always like to tell a story about when I was in Melbourne and there was an Agile meetup on the Tuesday night and a change management meetup on the Wednesday night, like in the two buildings right beside each other. And because I know people in both, I'm like, well, let's help the Agile people run amok in the change meetup and vice versa. And in the change one, you know, the change managers were like, oh, you Agile people, you come in and just wreck our organizations and disrupt things with all your fancy tricks and ideas and meh.
Not completely inaccurate.
Yeah. And then the Agile one was like, oh, you change people, you don't get it. You're so stodgy with your 10,000 step framework and blah, blah, blah. And the more they talk to each other, they're just like, holy shit, we want the same thing. Like, how can we work together? So I people like get mad when I say that. They're like, how could you say that about blah? But it's just change people want to help people solve problems. That's it. When you boil away all the noise and all the BS. And I think these ideas, when they look at them, they're like, yeah, this is going to help me figure out a problem.
I love the subtitle, Frameworks to Sensemaking, because that unpacked, that's really powerful. And I think it was probably in your intro, Ken, you talked about your frustration with the framework trap. And one of you talked about the transformation treadmill. And this is none of those. It is, as you say, big ideas to make your own within your context. And that was really great. Jason, I loved your frying pan to the head metaphor. Was there a frying pan to the head moment? Did Ken come with the skillet, or was this a absolutely? Yeah, I got it. You don't need to hit me.
Here, I'm going to sit back. I want to hear this answer.
No, the thing that Ken is amazing at is taking these complex ideas that you can't put your finger on and finding the right words to describe them. And it's like, you know, we get caught up on semantics sometimes, but they matter. They matter a lot. And the choice of words, especially, you know, taking the 4 or 5 things that were the inspiration behind the vortex, people can look at that and it can explain very well why whacking people over the head with the Agile stick isn't working. So you can try to find, you know, what do we need to create enough escape velocity to get out of this inner circle of control? And what I found in the best we could do in Agile, at least, was, oh, that's not Agile. You can't do that. Right? Like, we can't leap from a control organization and just say we want to transform and then get everybody on the bus and magically transform. Like, we can't go from the inner circle to the outer circle. So I like the way that he described almost the little small nudges, right? Like, you're circling around this organizations that value control and stability. They get out what they put into it, and it doesn't matter what language they use. And then we come in out here in the outer circle and start going, no, you need to be adaptable. You need to be transform. And they're just like, this doesn't make any sense. So the way that he described and created that vortex, I think just was like, yeah, this needs to be out in the world somewhere.
Yeah, if you haven't grabbed the book, get it in print or Kindle, because there are wonderful visual explanations that accompany the choice words.
Yeah, Ken, I've heard Jason's sort of rant on, yeah, that's fantastic. I've heard Jason's answer. He was kind of mentioning the orbit and breaking free of
Yeah,
this like rigidity and such, and the
sure.
agile stick. Like, what's your, I guess, what's your take on that? Mostly just because I've not heard, we've not met before, so I'm just kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
curious, like, where are you at in the journey of like that orbit that we're trying to break free from?
Yeah. Well, it's probably important to mention that other than the like the five universals and the four dimensions, which is directly from Jason's content, and the five waves I've kind of modified to be more about transformation as opposed to a little bit more generic, which is the way that Jason originally described it some time ago. The other stuff is completely new, and it was all really initially born out of trying to help myself. And so the more I thought about things and the more I visualized things, because I'm a visual kind of guy, the more I thought about them and put them together visually, the more that they made sense to me. And in the end, the more that I started putting those things in front of others, and then it started making sense to them. And I was like, well, wait a minute, like this stuff that's working for me is now working for other people, and it's the exact same thing, even though their context is different. And that was really the power behind it. So the vortex was really kind of built out of that idea. I was just kind of sitting around one day and I was thinking about some of the challenges that I was having personally around how effective I could be as a coach and in the systems that I was working in. So I was like, well, I tend to struggle in certain situations. And so why is that? And so I started thinking about that. And then I started going and finding models that already existed. So for instance, the vortex references three models on the bottom three bands, and it's Bob Anderson's leadership levels from his Mastering Leadership book. It's Frederick Laloux's organizational altitudes, or at least that's what I call them, from his Reinventing Organizations book. And then, of course, William Schneider's culture and leadership models from his book that he wrote like back in the 90s or something. I think it was, Jason. What was that one called? I always forget that one.
The re-engineering alternative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those three models to me made a lot of sense. They all had four levels. They all have some kind of connective tissue between them. And while they're not a direct correlation across all four of the levels across the three models, there's loose tissue there that you can kind of make sense of. And then I started thinking about, well, every organization is a system made of people, and what they put into those systems causes people to then have certain behavioral patterns. And they're probably putting those behavioral patterns into their system or the expectations of those behavioral patterns in order to get some certain outcome. But they're likely getting an outcome that they don't expect sometimes. And so what I started to do was actually put those ideas together and then marry them up to the existing models. And in the center, I just kind of put a stamp of this term I've used for a long time, which was organizational gravity. At the center of the vortex is gravity that's trying to suck everybody back into the status quo, which is the reason why the inner circles in the vortex are more well-known behavioral patterns: control-based, standard-based, conformity-based,
Sure.
Egocentric leadership, things like ambition and achievement and goals and excellence and those kind of things that we're all very, very familiar with. Yet we try to come in into the other levels of the vortex, the outer levels of the vortex, and do our kind of like elevated understanding that we've learned kind of through the Agile community and other places. And we tend to come in a mismatched way. And I think that's what I was struggling with. And at the end of the day, these are the feelings and the kind of behavioral patterns of myself and the struggles I was having that born the vortex at the end of the day.
Nice.
That's a lot of big ideas. And
Yeah.
I'm curious from kind of both of your perspectives, like when you're in it, like, let's say, obviously this is way too much to present at once. I would never assume that you all would like sit in a workshop with leaders and just go, we're going to go one by one through all of these. Here's 7,000 slides. Like I would never assume that we would do that, but you are presenting a lot of big ideas. And I'm curious, Ken and Jason, from your perspectives, like, how do you balance big ideas? Because they're like every room has both kinds of people in it. There's people that love the big ideas and struggle to execute. And there are people that like, don't tell me these big ideas. I'm not here to change my mindset. Just tell me what to do. Like the room is always filled with both people, and you have to communicate with both of them. So like, how do y'all balance that out? Like thinking about this big this big concept.
Yeah. When I put these things in front of people of all roles and function types in an organization, the thing I've learned to do is get really good at being okay with awkward silence, because it's what's needed and it's what happens. It's like I can take the vortex and I've got ways to strip it down to its basic individual bands. And so you can take the vortex, usually not as the first thing you put in front of someone, because
Sure.
there's actually something else that we've got that we've strung together that it's kind of like the problem statement in a very digestible and understandable way. We call that, it's not been released yet, it's coming in the bigger book, but it's called How Does Your System Change? It's this idea of asking the question of how does your system change, and then walking people through a couple different steps in order to get them to kind of make sense and rationalize what's going on in their system. That's generally the first thing I put in front of them. So that helps orient and ground them. And then you can start bringing in things like the vortex or any one of the 6 big ideas in order to start helping them connect their dots in their own context, and then also start to help them unravel. It's that unraveling process that takes some time. It takes some multiple courses of a meal of digesting the information.
Sure.
And to do that, to get people to actually see these highly strategic, highly sense-making concepts and to be able to digest them, you got to be able to give them time.
Yeah.
And so that's why I've just gotten really good at being able to just kind of say something and then stop and let them sit with it.
Is there any one of these 6 big ideas that stands out, or your when silence has gone on for a minute and a half, you drip an idea on the table to see if it resonates or creates the right ripples in the pond? Is there one of them or 2 of them that stand out that maybe we can unpack to let the audience who's listening, maybe hasn't read the book, get a taste of one of these?
We should probably also talk about what we're kind of just going in assuming everybody knows what this book already is. Like, we should probably introduce some of this to them too.
We'll try to get one of the ideas on the table,
Sure.
and then we'll see how we're doing on time, and maybe we can unpack the other 5. But we don't want to give away all of it. It's a short book, right? It's an easy plane flight read. It's an afternoon in the hammock.
You could read it on a flight. You could read it on the train. Like, somebody let us know the other day on LinkedIn. They were like, "Hey, I read this in 90 minutes on a train ride today."
Yeah.
Perfect.
So yeah.
So, do you have a favorite child? Sorry, big idea.
That's a good one.
Little, you go first. You haven't talked in a bit.
It's hard to say because the whole point is that it's contextual, right? It's
Yeah.
I would start from the intention of all of it is to unravel the complexity of your organization so you can decide what to do.
Mhm.
So a lot of that is first talking about consequence of action and intention of the change, and then how change comes into your organization. So I tend to start with, well, I actually just did this yesterday with a storytelling canvas with a company that wanted to change something. They weren't exactly sure what it was. So we started with storytelling, which is basically, let's honor the past, accept what this foreign element is, and then try to figure out what to do next. And in that process of uncovering the intention of what they want to do, then it's plugging in which of the 6 big ideas, or the vortex, which I guess we could have called it 7 big ideas, is going to help them make sense of this barricade that they just ran into. So I would always start from there. And then when you talk about how does your system change, a couple of the ideas that we talked about are just stolen from Jerry Weinberg. So the 2 metaphors that he talked about in Becoming a Changed Artist was, how does change happen in your system? Is it dropped through the hole in the floor, which is your typical top-down, leaders dream up a change, they drop it into the organization, and then hilarity ensues when people run around like chickens with their heads cut off? Or is it more like diffusion, which Jerry calls that like adding colored dye to water? And Niles Flaging talks about this, adding milk to coffee, right? Jerry talked about this in the 60s. So this is where you start to get misfits. We want to transform, we want to push decision-making down, but our operating mode is to drop change through the hole in the floor. So we've already decided what the change is. We've already decided the budget and the schedule for this, and now we're going to drop it in, and then we're stuck. Now we've got to take a look at Well, maybe the 5 levers is the thing to latch onto. So what are you going to change? Well, we're going to create a new Agile COE and create a new Agile process. Okay. How many times have you tried that so far? Well, 7. So now we bring in the 5 waves of transformative change, and we go and we start to use those waves to say, this is how change happens. Like the first kick at the can is we replace a process with a new one, and then we go, oh shit, why didn't that work? Maybe that's not the right process. So let's try a new one. And then let's do that 5 or 6 times. And then we go, you know what, maybe it's not the process. Maybe it's something else. So it's the whole arc of the story. So unpacking the intention for me anyway, and then plugging in which of the 6 ideas is going to help them unravel why they're stuck and then how they can jiggle themselves loose.
I'd love the sharks of change in the water underneath the waves.
Mhm.
Let's talk about them a little bit more. Is that the antibodies that swarm against it, the resistance, all the above? How do you help people proactively take the blood out of the water?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like a good song lyric, you know. Everyone's going to interpret it their own way, I think. But I think if I had to describe it, it would be that those first 2 waves, you know, Jason had described the 5 ways to change originally, with the first 2 waves being highly superficial. I kind of took his wording of it and said, yeah, if you relate that to the 5 levers, it's because they're sticking to the right side of the 5 levers, just to technology and process. And so it's that kind of superficial thinking. It causes them to only have minimal impact in those very minimal height and impact waves on the beginning of the 5 ways of transformation. And so then the sharks are there to signify this idea that if people don't get beyond the superficial thinking, the technology and process thinking, that like all problems in the organization are solved either with process or technology, then every change they try to do is either going to stay stagnant because the sharks are there offshore, keeping that change there in the superficial thinking, or it's going to actually die because they're going to try to move forward and the sharks are essentially going to gobble it up, and then it's going to drop down to the bottom, and that's why all the bones are there. Is to signify this idea that, hey, we tried and it didn't work and we've given up. And so we'll figure out at some other time in the future when we want to try again, and maybe we'll try in a different way, but we'll start likely back over again, or we'll become smart enough to actually figure out how to jump the sharks and get into the more reflective and awareness state of.
I was just saying to myself, this might be the most metaphor heavy episode of the Agile Uprising podcast we've ever produced.
Hey, you should hang out with us more often.
I love all of this.
I've got the pictures to follow along.
Yeah.
I was just thinking I was thinking about like cuts and, you know, like scars and all that. And I'm like, hold on. Like, dude, don't add your metaphors into this. We got enough.
Well, let's keep going. So you talked about the first 2 waves, you know, process, superficial. What's the promise if you get a little bit closer and you have increasing impact? What are the next couple of waves that are the potential of a positive transformation?
Ooh, that's a good one. So that's where, you know, you could take, for example, the vortex. Say you've gone through a couple of waves. So you guys have probably seen these patterns forever, right? Every 12 to 18 months, the Agile COE people get cycled, or a new VP comes in, or a new consulting firm or whatever, and they just do the same thing over and over again. You can use the vortex to say, well, if we've gone through like 2 or 3 superficial waves, is there something inside this vortex that is telling us why we keep going back to the thing that's the easiest, which is just changing process? Why are we doing that? Number one, because it's visible. You can see it, right? You can see a PowerPoint with a diagram of what the process is. So that fools people into progress, thinking that they've made progress. And now you can start to have conversations around, you know, if you look at the second inner circle, where we move away from standards and towards goals, what would happen if we made that shift towards goals? What would we have to change in our system? Then you can look at the 5 levers and go, well, we're actually going to have to change the performance structures, because if we're now going to be goal-based, then we have to rethink how we do functional performance management. And all these things, it's not telling you how to do it. It's telling you you need to accept the consequences of the change that you're trying to make. So if you want to transform and you keep staying in that superficial wave over and over again, just doing process, stop calling it a transformation. Call it a process improvement program. Be congruent, because people see right through that stuff. So part of it is like a lesson in how to be congruent when you're bringing change in as well.
Yeah. I was just at the Global Scrum gathering in New Orleans a couple of days ago, presenting all this stuff in a workshop. And we got to talking, the group that was in there, and I was talking to them about the two change strategies, right? This idea that, we can either optimize our system, meaning like we can go and find the problems and we can analyze those problems, and then we can focus on a problem and then try to solve for that problem. Or we can also try to think about, well, how would we solve this problem in ways that we never have before, with thinking and behavioral patterns that we've never done before, in order to actually evolve the system itself. And so we were talking about how most agile transformations are really just optimization, because they're really just like, hey, we want to do Scrum, or we want to do Scrum better, faster, or cheaper, or hey, we want to get these products out better, faster, cheaper. And those are all optimization things. And so I told them, I said, well, really, we shouldn't talk about agile transformations. If that's what everyone's doing in the industry, we should really talk about agile optimizations. Because at the end of the day, that's really what most companies are trying to do. They're really not trying to evolve. They're just trying to get better, faster, cheaper.
What do you say to the person that says, aren't those the same thing?
Yeah, I would take them right to the image.
Yeah.
And put it in front of them, and then I would exercise that silence, that ability to handle the silence, because to let them digest that and start to unravel it a little bit, I think is what's needed.
Well, let me press further then. What if they look at that and still don't get it? I mean, how do you, I'm not asking you to give away the whole book. I'm just like, just as a person, like, how do you help them? I oftentimes am like, look, here, don't you see? And oftentimes they go,
Yeah.
oh, I see words, I see ideas,
Yeah.
but I don't see what you see.
Yeah, I wish the how your system changes thing was out there in the public yet. It's not, but it really is the tie that binds, in my opinion, because I think you're right. You can put any one of the 6 big ideas, or even the vortex in some ways, in front of people, and they can still, with their current worldview and their current thinking, they can still look at it with their own lens and go, yeah, I don't agree with that, or I don't think that's going to work, or hey, we already do this. But it's when you get to the how does your system change, and we get through this idea that everybody needs to make money. Every organization needs to make money. That's 100% true. But the problem is that they often run into problems with making money because of all the VUCA that's in the system. And then from there, it gets into like societal and competitive and organizational dynamics, and how that weaves together this idea of chaos. And then it really comes down to, what strategies are you going to deploy in order to handle the chaos? And then ultimately, what outcome are you getting out of those strategies you're deploying in your organization? That really starts to help people connect the dots in a lot of ways.
I suspect optimization is less scary and full of risk as evolutionary changes. Jason, you talked about, okay, what system influence or gravity is causing this behavior? Oh, it's the performance appraisal system, or it's the incentive system. And so when you talk about evolutionary change, you're fucking with some serious levers.
Mhm.
Mhm.
My bonus, wait a minute, you want me to risk my bonus? Nope, nope. That's 18 months worth of risk, and yeah, I vest in about 24. Good luck. I'll optimize over the next 90 days. And so crossing that to unlock true, what's your equation? Optimization plus evolution allows you to be adaptable and journey through and make sense of the chaos and the
Mhm.
complexity. But it's freaking scary.
Yeah, it is. I did a Lego serious play session with one of the banks that may or may not be recently accused of laundering drug cartel money, but I won't mention the name of the bank. And they just reported record earnings, so crime pays. Anyway, so the SVP wanted to do a Lego serious play session because they were merging East and West operations in their mortgage division, and they wanted the mortgage managers to stop being managers and start being coaches, meaning we're taking away your compensation to a certain degree because you need to help everybody else. Like, we're going to try to build a team system instead of an individual rewards-based system. And when I talked to her, and my God, she was super smart. She knew exactly what she was doing. I said, this isn't going to work, right? She's like, yeah, I know. I said, how are you going to deal with this evolutionary concept that you're talking about? And she said, well, we're going to do that later, but what we need first is an asteroid to hit the planet.
Ooh.
To shake things up first. We know people are going to be upset. We know some people are probably going to leave, but we need to start getting them thinking about our next evolution as an organization. And it was by far the worst thing that I've ever done. Like, we were in a bank branch in one of their boardrooms with one big long table, and everybody was sitting around it. And we were creating models around, what does our future look like and when we're merged and all this kind of stuff. And when they realized they were going to lose some of their compensation, let's just say the models they built were not safe for work. People were building people bent over with things behind them, and it was bad. Like, they were just disruptive and not paying attention and stuff. And I found myself doing things like, I hear people who aren't me talking. I was really starting to treat them like children. And I told the SVP, I said, like, you have to step in here. Nobody's paying attention. They're just like treating this as a joke and whatever, and you need to do something, or I'm stopping and I'm walking out. But that's exactly what she wanted. She wanted something that just was like the asteroid hitting the planet, which opened the door for the deeper conversations later. That's what transformation is, an evolution, right? It's the willingness to accept, I'm going to make things worse for an indeterminate period of time, and we're going to build it back up again. When you talk about the people who are looking at the model and they can't get it, the two strategies, give them a quick biology lesson about what happens to a caterpillar when it transforms, right? You've seen all these pretty pictures on LinkedIn, and look, we're going to transform. Blah. You know what happens inside that chrysalis?
They freaking dissolve.
It dissolves itself down to the cell level and rebuilds itself, right?
Bizarre. But talk about courage. Talk about courage of that leader.
Well, hold on. Before we laud this leader in any way, shape, or form, like, can we just, like, Jason, you and I've talked about this for years. Like, it's easy when it affects someone else, and the leader is always willing to make a change that affects someone named not me. So, like, I'm not saying anybody is giving anybody flowers. I'm just saying, like, it
is her, because she's putting her career on the line, right? She now has a shelf life of 1 year to get results, or she's out. That's the way it works in finance. Like, sorry to be blunt, but if you're going to take on something that's that drastic and that big of a change, your reputation is on the line, and you got a very short leash to show results. So yeah, courage for sure. But this is the intention of the 6 big ideas. It's like, let's have a conversation about what we're getting ourselves into. And if the best we can do is process optimization, then let's just do that now. Let's not bother with hiring $3 million worth of coaches or consultants or reorganizing around these other types of things. And let's just install Jira and build a faster workflow, and let's shrink our delivery time from 12 months to 6 months. That might be the best they can do. And that's kind of what we want people to talk about.
Yeah, sometimes they have to keep playing out in the waves out in the ocean, and sometimes they have to know that the sharks are there and that's what's keeping them at bay. But or they also have to keep getting eaten by the sharks. Of course, this is a metaphor, so they don't actually die, which is great. But the change kind of has to die in a way, like that iteration of the change has to die, and they have to see that it didn't work. And then once they see that it didn't work, but they also feel like they have to try something else, because they're like, well, we can't just do nothing.
And you can't just do a process or technology. You've mentioned the 5 levers a couple of times, and we've touched on 1 or 2 of them, process, technology. But if you only do them, you don't really benefit from the ride of the 5 waves. Let's unpack those 5 levers of change.
Yeah. Well, as we were talking about this at the Global Scrum Gathering this week in that session, we talked about how a lot of organizations, when they take on Agile, they generally don't want to change much of their structure and strategy. It's not an appetite that they have in a lot of cases. I think we were just talking about how one example, Jason just described how there was a leader that had an appetite to kind of shake things up pretty substantially. But my experience, and I think a lot of our experiences, is that they generally don't want to change strategy and structure. They want to keep it kind of in the norm. or in the status quo, or kind of wherever the gravity lies of what's currently happening. So they'll generally gravitate towards the technology and process, because that's really kind of the rituals that we perform on a regular basis. And those things are easy to identify and change, and, all those kind of things. Even though not everyone's happy with those changes either. But it's the center of everything. I mean, I loved, Jason talks about it all the time, about the quote from Jerry Weinberg, or maybe it was from Virginia Satir. I can't remember who originally said it. We kind of go back and forth on who the original source was. But the whole idea of how organizations are made of people. And if that's true, and you can believe that to be true, then that means that every problem that exists must be a people problem. And that's why the people is large and in the center of that visualization, so that we recognize that, yeah, people use or create and use technology. People create and use processes. People live and execute in a structure, and people create and execute strategies. And if you think about it like that, then in theory, what you should be doing is every change should start with people first. And in large part, it should revolve around people and helping them address the change at a personal level, so that they can either create and or execute technology processes, live in a structure that helps them, and or execute strategies that help them accomplish what they're looking for.
Yeah. And the sound bite that popped into my head was, it's not a way for change people to go, I can use these to get those people to change the way that I think they should. And it's 100% what some people are going to do. Because when you talk about people, right, it's not just the change person and all of their baggage and their skills and everything else. It's all the other people that they're interacting with in that session. So it's not it's a sense-making tool that I, as a change person, can use to help other people figure out and unravel their system, because they have to live with the consequence, not me. And we know people are going to say, well, Ken and Jason said you're supposed to do this because that's what the book says. And that's what the 4 dimensions are.
Sure.
It's to try to describe that we all think differently, right? Like, some of us are very literal thinkers, and we're going to see, oh, these 5 levers. I need to make a plan for each one of these 5. So each one of these levers needs to be a swim lane on my Kanban board with all the tasks that we're going to do to change those things. Because that's how some people think. And that's one important component, but it's the interaction with all the people in the system, so they can decide collectively what to do. And you're going to be limited to the collection of those interactions.
The words that you said, Jason, that like cut right through me, was when you said, like, I think they should, like, change like I think they should. And I wanted to get to this eventually, especially with the agile delivery isn't enough component of this conversation, but like, that is a fundamental challenge we have in our climate today. I mean, we don't have to get into the what's wrong with agile, conversation unless we wander accidentally into there, but that is a big component of, like, I think they should.
Yep. And we've all done it.
Yeah, I mean,
I know I've done it. You hired me as an agile coach.
Yep.
Therefore, you are asking me to do this, and I don't understand when you don't behave in the way I think you should be behaving. And well, because back then, there was nothing, right? Mid-2000s, there was nothing around organizational change that was relevant.
Right.
That was mainstream. The idea, like, these ideas go back since humans started trading corn and wheat, centuries ago. So the need to organize people around something has always been there, but there really wasn't anything in the agile transformation space back then that could act as a sense-making guide. Or it was too theoretical, or it was too fluffy, or it was too, whatever.
There's a humility component to this that I feel like is, again, I've said this on many podcasts, but I did an entire podcast with Hershko where I had a couple of bourbons, and he said, tell me all the mistakes that you've made as a coach. And I actually found it rather cathartic just to start going, I thought you were supposed to do this. I felt like this is the change that this is the change that I've decided that you should make. And I don't know how much of that stuff was necessarily wrong, but I mean, there's not a lot of wrong, but there is many rights, and crafting that version of right is a huge challenge. But approaching that a phrase of like you should requires an extreme amount of humility that I don't know if we've ever possessed as a community, but definitely is more needed now than ever.
I love big idea number two, change how you see change, and I think we're dabbling in that, right? As soon as you should do it the way I've learned, that's a good indicator. The other beautiful gem I got is when you talked about resistance as a signal, a powerful signal, not to overcome or squash, but to amplify, because it's alerting you to misalignment or lack of congruence, and that's a signal to make some sense out of it. And I think that ties in a little bit to that four dimension of change. Start with oneself.
Yeah, the five universals were born out of, I spent, I don't know, 6 or 7 years traveling, and those were patterns from organizations that, we use the word might a lot in the book, which people don't like because that doesn't bring certainty. And we call it out specifically. We use the word might. This might help you because the book doesn't know your context. It's just paper. But those five universals were organizations that seemed to do better with change, and there is absolutely no way to quantify that, exhibited these types of behaviors and interactions. They focused less on coercing people with urgency and more on using meaningful dialogue and rallying people around a purpose and being transparent. So there's in I don't remember which chapter it's in, but there's those patterns are listed in there, and that's where those five universals were born. It was these things. There's always a time to broadcast information at people and share stuff, but that's not primarily what you want to do. You want to create dialogue. And then the four dimensions was very similar. The story I tell around that is went to this traditional change conference where they wanted to do this innovative open space at the beginning. So right at the beginning of the day, person goes up on stage. We're going to do this agile open space. And I was like, oh, Jesus, here we go. Here's the four topics that you are all going to discuss. Topic number one is going to be in that area, and Biff is your moderator. And they had the chairs like in an umbrella around Biff in the middle in the four areas, and Biff directed the conversation. So my talk was right after that. And I don't know if it's a coincidence that they've never invited me back, but I called it out because they wanted me to talk about Agile and change. And I said, here's the fundamental difference. If this was an Agile conference, there'd be a bunch of paper and markers in the middle. You'd have the best well-run conference you've ever seen in 15 minutes. Because it would have been driven by what the people wanted to talk about. And here's what happened here. And here's why I suspect why it happened here. Had nothing to do with, the people who organized it that way were probably afraid that the board would get mad at them if there wasn't enough structure. Because if the people rate the conference bad, what is the board going to do? They're going to come back to the organizers. So that's what the four dimensions is. Again, consequence of action. You're using a tool based on an idea that was created for this particular environment, but your baggage got in the way. Yourself and your stance got in the way of applying the tool the way it was intended for a bunch of reasons. And that doesn't mean it's wrong or right. It means you've accepted the consequence of doing something ass backwards for some reason.
That reminds me of one of your original metaphors, Jason, that I remember reading on your blog way back in the day about when you're remodeling, your basement or your room, and you pull you think it's going to be this, and then you pull the wall off and you realize there's all sorts of stuff behind there that you had no idea. And then you're like, well, this job just changed. I'd love, can you start? Cause I feel like this is really appropriate for everybody. Like Andy talking about how you got to start with yourself, because we all know, and many in our audience knows, like, getting to know yourself is one of the most important activities of anybody responsible, whatever community you identify yourself with, audience. starting, like if you're asking people to do something different, you have to understand yourself first and how you're showing up.
Right.
And like everybody's got their own path of A, getting to know yourself, and B, continuously getting, like it's a continuous exploration. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, like what are some activities that both of y'all do to, like, I guess, continually get to know yourself and see where you're showing up?
Yeah, well, I jumped right into the lake head first, and it was frozen initially, but then it broke, I guess. But for me, in the past 2 or 3 years, I've really been on a kind of an adventure, wandering around in the jungle, and it really kind of took place because I got so frustrated with the way I was operating and the way that I thought people were perceiving that, and I was really uncomfortable with the whole idea that I wasn't being successful, and I just couldn't feel things changing for others or even for myself or whatever the context was that I was doing. And it also weighed on me that the industry was getting too kind of fixed on frameworks. And so I think with all that, I started to really kind of do some soul searching in a way and just started to figure out what it was that I was doing that I thought was good and was working, and then what I thought wasn't working. So one of the things I thought wasn't working was that I would often, when I would try to, in either a Scrum Master role or an Agile coach role, whatever, if I'm working with a team that's using Scrum, then I would often try to help them understand how to utilize or in some way, shape, or form become more effective with Scrum. And I didn't really have a lot of good ideas to be able to help them see the things that they weren't doing well, other than taking them to the Scrum Guide and going like, here's what the Scrum Guide says.
Hmm.
And I could tell that behavioral pattern was what was limiting to me, because they could just as easily go and read the Scrum Guide, and they would read it with their own lens, and they would read it with their own understanding. And if they had already done that, then whatever they were exhibiting as their characteristics and behavioral patterns within their teams meant that they thought they understood it. And there was no way in the world I was going to convince them otherwise.
Sure.
So I had just become kind of really trapped in a way. And I think it was through doing some work with, well, actually, it was actually finding Jason in about late 2020, I guess. And then starting to learn about lean change, and then eventually learning about, I did about a year's worth of work with Michael Hammond and Michael Spade and the IC Agile's ICE program. I mean, that was, if you know Spade, he pretty much only focuses on personal development.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't really do much of anything else these days. And um, the impact of what he does with that, though, is substantial.
Yeah.
And so I think the introspection that he caused me to do was what really started to help. And I'll say, even to this day, while I have started to understand more about myself, I'm constantly understanding more about myself. And I'm also understanding that people likely will never really understand me. Because even to this day, I get people that still come up to me, and they are looking at what I'm doing and how I'm doing it through their own lens. And then through that lens, they are ultimately judging me for what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And I know that if I'm going to stay true to myself and do the things that I think need to be done in order to help an organization or an environment, or just to get ideas in front of people so that they can figure out how to do something different than they're currently doing without forcing them to do it, without using will in order to put them in that position, I have to be comfortable with them not understanding what I'm doing and why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it.
It's almost like a snake eating its tail of, like,
Yes.
you understanding that nobody may ever understand you or know
Yeah.
you. That is another piece of getting to know yourself, is what if nobody ever really truly knows me?
Yeah.
What if I walk around this conference for five?
Right.
I had that realization last year in Orlando of, like, what if nobody cares that I'm here? Does
Yeah.
that mean that I got something from being here? Does it matter if
Yeah.
nobody cares that I'm here? And that realization and that understanding fuels the, like, well, A, that's not true. And B, even if it was, like, that, this isn't about them, this is about me. I don't know. Jason, what about you? Like, how are you continuously getting to know yourself?
That's a good question. I don't know. I spend a lot of time with my brain. Right? Like, I don't know a better way to describe it other than everybody in my family is on their phones 24/7, and mine's off at 5 o'clock, unless I have work or something that I have to finish. I'll just, it's pretty nice out today. I'll just grab a coffee or some whiskey, or put the whiskey in the coffee, and just sit out there and think, right? Spend time with your brain. Think about stuff that you did the day and how you might do it differently. And think of old, consulting gigs that I had where I'm like, what the fuck was I thinking there? And then, run scenarios through about how would I do it differently and why would I do it differently? And just spending time with my brain is the way that I do it. And just think about the ideas. And yeah.
I think we just invented lean change branded coffee just now.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I should do. Everybody's doing that, right? And everybody's got their own brand of tequila
Sure.
and stuff like that. Should do that. To piggyback on the thing Ken was talking about, with the Scrum Guide and stuff. I was in a telecom where they actually were split testing the consultants. They hired us and they hired a global consulting firm, and we were working with the teams and stuff like that. We came in with a coaching stance. They very much came in with a consulting stance. Meaning when the team would run up against a problem with Scrum doesn't work that way. You got to do it this way. And in that particular culture, which was a high competence culture, they did not respond well to being told how they should work. Whereas our approach was, well, here's what it is by the book. Is that possible? Why or why not? Do you want to try that just to see so we can rule out the process being the problem? Oh, we can't because of. I'm like, well, the because of is the problem we need to solve. Do we want to talk about that, try to solve that? They're like, no, we got to get this release out. All right, then let's do it. What do we need to do that? So the fact that we were there to help, they fired the other global consulting firm a week after that. They're like, all of you get out. Like, this isn't what we need. We need people who are going to help us. We don't want zealots. And they were great guys. Like, I liked all of them and working with them. It's just, they took a gamble on their stance and it didn't pay off. And we were more like, what do I care? You're the one who has to live with the consequence. Kind of nonchalantish attitude. But that's where the engine comes into play, right? The insights, options, experiments. You've hit this problem. Here's 20 options. All y'all pick which one you think, or 2 or 3 are going to be the right ones to do next week. And then let's learn from it and keep repeating.
Yeah, we might need to double back to the Agile folks that fell over when you said, when you were talking about showing up with a coach's stance and a consultant stance, and they're like, but wait, I'm a coach and I show up and I give them rules and tell them what to do. So we might need to pick them up and help them back into the fold.
If you have permission to do that, go for it.
Sure.
That's your, like, Ken talks about this all the time, systems entry. Where is your entry point into the system and what are the expectations that you've set? And if I did this actually with a manufacturing company a couple months ago, or geez, probably 3 or 4 months ago now, we agreed on the stance I would take. They're like, we want you to push us towards how it's done by the book. Great, then that's what I'll do. So make sure that your systems entry is done well enough where you've got good expectations set and you understand what level you're being brought in. Because a lot of the time, have you guys seen this where you're brought in at the team level to be a team coach, and then you start running amok in the management and organizational layer, and then people start to go like, why is this person talking to us about performance management and training and stuff? They're just supposed to be getting the team to do Scrum. So you've got to find your right systems entry point and set those expectations.
Well, and also choose whether to be disruptive or not, intentionally disruptive.
Yeah.
That's the other thing too.
There's a big piece of getting to know yourself to know that entry point, because a lot of us do not understand that we are wired for, those that are just like, I'm a coach. I'll be gentle. Like, I'm just here to help them guide themselves to it. And then they halfway through realize, like, I have been very disruptive. I have been more combative than I realized. And I know that was a big aha moment for me in my journey of getting to know myself, of like, you're not as gentle as you think you are, Murman. You need to understand why and if you want to change, then you need to understand why you're doing it. And if you're not going to change, then you just need to lean into it and go, hey, I'm disruptive. This is part of what it is. It's a very, 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 the conflict, the inner conflict is mighty.
Yeah, I think if you're going to get beyond the sharks, disruption is needed. And if you're going to be intentionally and productively disruptive, you've got to understand yourself as a coach. And you also have to be very comfortable with your ability to disrupt and the fact that you aren't going to be friends with everyone. Because it takes more than that.
Yeah.
So what's next? You hinted a couple of times that this little book was part of a bigger initiative. What you got brewing?
The big book. Maybe we'll call it the book on change, so we can just say we literally wrote the book on change. Hang on, I'm going to go grab that domain and trademark it.
How would you like to keep the conversation going? You talk about these 6 ideas being contextual, and so it sounds like you'd love a little bit of feedback from people who are experimenting with them. What's the best way to keep that conversation going?
Go to 6bigideas.org. It's not up there yet, but by the time this airs, it probably will be. We've got the 6 ideas laid out there with a little description. There's going to be an explainer video for each, and then there's going to be something interactive that walks them through how to use or apply these, because we want to see, what's confusing about any of these, what resonates, what have you tried, tell me your story. And obviously AI is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us, because it's going to analyze all that stuff. And I would think it's safe to say we're both pattern people. Ken, is that an accurate assessment? Right? Like, we don't worry about the outliers. Oh, that'll never work in my context. Well, then go do something else. Like, we don't care. It's the patterns we're after, because there's always going to be outliers. But 6bigideas.org is going to have some interactive stuff yet to be determined to grab that.
Awesome.
Yeah. And the quick thing I'll add too is that we're also getting ready to turn the 6 big ideas. There'll be 7 sessions. So back to whether it's 6 big ideas or 7, I guess, but including the Vortex, we're going to put a virtual course together that's going to be short drop-in sessions where we're going to go over, one session is going to hit one of the big ideas. You're going to be able to bring your context to it. You're going to make sense after learning a little bit about the concept. We're going to spend the whole rest of the time actually making a sense of your context in small groups with other folks. And those will be about an hour and a half sessions or so. So that'll be on the bigideas.org website too, pretty soon.
Yep. And then you've got the cool thing is that's one perspective. So the tool will be in a way that, I don't know, you can invite other people from your organization. Because again, when you make sense of these things, now I've made sense of the context with all of my baggage, but I need to interact with all the other people who are affected by this, or at least, the movers, the people who are going to help move the change forward, and see if their perspective is similar or different, and why. And now what are we going to do about it? So hopefully the tool will, you can invite your coworkers, and it will do something to give you some patterns or tell you what might be some options you might want to try, because we keep saying the word might, and I know people hate that.
Yeah, if the people are still listening, I don't think that word's gonna trip them up at this point in time.
Bring us home, Chris.
I can't wait to get certified in 6 big ideas or 7 like that. I know that's a lot of letters, but I feel like putting that after my name in LinkedIn is a great idea. Yeah. Let me just tell everybody, when Jason made his joke about steak knives with your copy of Lean Change, like I cannot say how revolutionary a lot of these ideas were earlier in my Agile journey, and as I continue to get to know the work of these 2 fine authors, again, this journey is about us and where we're at, and you can't help somebody unless you look at this through your own lens. I cannot more strongly endorse. All of that grammar was bad, but I cannot give this a big enough endorsement, just because like ideas like this are what is needed to further uncover little bits of nuance and pieces. I get something out of Lean Change every time I read it, Jason. And I know that Ken probably feels the same way, which is why I started bugging you about what do I do with all these ideas. And I really appreciate the fact that you all are not forcing rules on anybody. You're just forcing people to have a conversation with yourself, which is why I'm glad we centered on that piece of the conversation. And I really want to encourage the community. Please have a conversation with these two gentlemen. They neither of them have an ego online or in person about like disagreements or challenges or what do I do's. The more you give them that, the better this new Book of Mormon they're going to write is going to be. So I can't wait to finish both the small and the big book.
Great.
Right on. Thank you.
Very much so. Andy?
Poke into the show notes. There'll be links to the book in print and Kindle. There's an extra goodie. Jason, you love Ginsu knives and bamboo steamers, so read chapter 12 for the extra goodies on top of the 6 big ideas. We'll put in your LinkedIn information and the usual. So thank you. Subscribe, buy the book, subscribe, join on Patreon, subscribe, buy the book. For now, Agile Uprising, signing out.